Oh, John, I'm delighted to be talking to a fellow Scouser, multi-talented one, an author, a teacher, a filmmaker. Myself and Steve Evans here. Been looking forward to meeting with you.
Hi, John. Good to meet you.
Hi, it's Eddie. How are you, Steve?
Yeah. So, I've been reading a fair bit about your amazing journey from studying Russian at UCL, working in California, running a newspaper kiosk, quite diverse amount of stuff you've been doing there. But when you look back, which part of your journey feels like the beginning of your life as a storyteller?
It's a really interesting question, that, and I love to get a question like that because I don't often get asked it, to be honest. Well, I think it actually goes back about 170 years, which
Wow.
that's not to say I'm a vampire.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I know where you're going with this, but anyway.
uh, but it's something, and this is going to sound a bit, strange, surreal, and bizarre, but it's something I've got a really strong belief in, and it's the idea of the psychogeography where places and families and stories are told through generations, and buildings retain those sort of memories as well. And Liverpool's probably one of the most fascinating places on earth when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So I grew up with that. My mum was from Dingle, Park Road down there, so kind of right in the epicenter of L8, and she was very aware of her own oral tradition coming through her own family. And I've always heard these stories of particularly the mid 19th century because that's when many of my ancestors came over during the Great Hunger in Ireland. So there's that side of it. My dad was a jazz musician, so he was. Like most jazz musicians, he liked to get out and about. Let's put it that way. So he had his own set of stories as well from touring and doing all these things and with that. So right from the word go, as soon as I could, language became a thing. Stories were there, and I think I just naturally took to them. I just think it's something that I was drawn towards, from a very early age. So I was writing when I was a kid, but I only really started cracking on with it when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, because I did all the aforesaid things. Went down to London to study Russian, and that was great. I wouldn't swap it for the world. It was absolutely amazing. I still have lots of good friends from that era, and I learned a hell of a lot. And I learned an awful lot about espionage as well, because that's the college I was at was the spy school. Basically, it was part of UCL. It was it was a kind of recruitment ground for MI6, and Foreign Office. So I sort of I never really took that point of view myself because I just enjoyed it being down there. But I became strongly aware that this was what was going on around me, and I soaked it all up. So I think I spent about the first 30 years really researching, even though I didn't know I was researching, and I soaked up all this stuff. And then I wrote a science fiction novel, and then I wrote a crime novel. I got an agent down in London, and that was someone telling me, yeah, you can do this. Effectively getting an agent was a big deal back then. It sort of like was a clarion call, and through that process, I started making films because the agent had a sort of film wing to them. So I started sort of putting scripts together, and weirdly enough, and I say to my students, look, you've got to keep going and going and going, like before you get something properly made. But the first thing I wrote actually managed to get made. It was just a little short film I wrote. An idea that I'd almost kind of, it's like the McCartney story about yesterday. I just woke up one morning and just had this idea about this guy going for a very weird job interview, an advertising agency, and that kind of just all sort of snowballed. I think I'm giving you my life story here, guys, but
Fine,
effectively
absolutely fine.
from there, just to kind of bring you up to speed, I died in a war scouser and I was missing home. I was working for a software company, like you say, flitting between London and San Diego. and other places, because they sent me all over the world. And software was the kind of new rock and roll at the time. It seems being very glamorous, but it actually wasn't. It was ridiculously hard work. They wanted to own you. So even though I was kind of on the tour bus, as it were, I was going all these places, I didn't really get a chance to have a look at them because it was all hobnobbing and trying to sell units of this printing software. So I got fed up with it. It was burning me out, and I was only in my sort of mid-20s, late 20s. I just wanted to be a writer. So I just went, right, that's it. So thank you very much. Went back to Houston, jumped to the train, came home, and a mate of mine had just bought a newspaper kiosk in Crosby, by Crosby Station, the kind of weird little Victorian green kiosk, which was really difficult to go for a wee because they didn't have any kind of facilities around there. So you had to be very crafty about what you did, you know. But that was an education in itself, because you got all kinds of people. Ian McKellen, I remember dropped around. He was kind of touring around there, and he just decided to come and have a look. Loads of people, who kind of different walks of life, from people in care homes to, people who were just kind of trying to make the way in life, kids. Again, I say to my students, if you want to pick up a bit of rich material, just go to a train station, because you get people coming in from all kinds of walks of life, and it's really interesting. So again, more research, and that sort of started to snowball. And we said just before we came online about the Masters in Screenwriting at LJMU. I'd already got my first degree, and I thought, right, well, I love film, I want to give this a go. So I went and did the Masters in Screenwriting, and subsequently, while I was producing films, because I was making films for the BBC and whatnot at that point, I came on board with creative writing at LJMU, and that's what I'm doing now, or it's one of the things I'm doing now, outside all this other stuff that I know you can ask me questions about. So
okay, just on that, John, are you teaching? Is it full time at Liverpool John Moores? Was that part time?
No, I'm part time.
I was doing 2 nights a week, I think, when I was doing the course.
Yeah, it's I did used to teach the master's course, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. Yeah. But unfortunately, I had my wife got very, very seriously ill, and it meant that I couldn't really do the evenings. It just completely drove a coach and horses through it. Yeah. So I now teach the younger students. Generally, I say younger, but these days, it used to be the case you get quite a few mature students doing an undergraduate course. These days, because the student loan's open for masters and you can just go straight to masters, I found myself teaching predominantly 18 to 21-year-old students.
Digital writing.
Gravy. Digital writing, yeah, that's kind of the cornerstone of what I do, really, there, because it's sort of it kind of links in with some of my theories about being a writer. And I know hopefully people will listen to this podcast it'll chime with them. The opportunity is there just to go and get yourself published and find an audience. And with the process of doing that, and this can be 10 people or it can be 10 million people, you're always going to learn stuff, you're always going to pick stuff up. If you don't do that, then you can find yourself in a little bit of a bubble, especially if you're not doing a creative writing course, or you're not professionally employed at that point, or professionally published. So that for me is what digital writing's all about. That's what I try and instill. And it's amazing how many of them get to that point. They're very reluctant to publish, and I can understand that, because social media is a lot of it's rubbish. A lot of it's scary, and it's bent out of shape, and there are so many problems with it. But I still think, even with all that said, there's a side of it that can actually be inherently positive. If you use it in the right way, and embrace it in the right way, and you sort of got to take the rough with the smooth a little bit. But if you're willing to do that, then you can get a lot out of it.
Okay.
Fair enough. Okay, let's just move on to your novels then. So, Water Street and The Americans of Abercrombie Square, they both explore Liverpool's involvement in the American Civil War. So, tell us a bit about the novels, maybe a forgotten or little known impact that Liverpool had on the major world event, or, well, whatever you want, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It was a seismic event in the mid 19th century. I do a tour of Toxteth Park Cemetery in conjunction with Smithtown Lit Fest. Just a little plug there. Anyone's interested in coming on, we're going to be advertising it quite soon, so that's an exclusive for you guys. And Toxteth Park Cemetery, among others, and I kind of look at a lot of different sort of grave sites there. You got like Titanic survivors in there, and kind of civic leaders and whatnot of Liverpool, and real fantastic stories in those sites. But there's one guy that's buried there called James Dunwoody Bullock, who was actually from Savannah in Georgia originally. Now, just to give you an idea of the magnitude of this guy, he was a Confederate commander. He was garroted to Liverpool, so he was given the mission, if you like, of coming to Liverpool in the early 1860s, 1862, and putting together the Confederate Navy. Now, he had, just to give you an idea of he was at his funeral in, I think it was 1901, President Roosevelt came to Toxteth Park Cemetery and delivered a eulogy. And the reason why he did that was because President Roosevelt was James Dunwoody Bullock's favourite nephew. And James Dunwoody Bullock was his favourite uncle. So whenever I go down to that site, and it pretty much 9 times out of 10, someone plants a Confederate flag, a very new looking plastic Confederate flag there, and you can get rid of it. And I know it is a toxic symbol in my view, but it's kind of it's funny how it links the United States as a kind of growing country. And this is something that I think when I say to people, the intrinsic vital role that Liverpool had, not just Great Britain and the Empire and so forth, but Liverpool specifically had, because in some ways it was so powerful as a city that there was a sort of level of sort of like independence, if you like, and I think that's something that's kind of shines through to this day, the kind of Scouse not English thing. But I can see the origins of it in that era because of the sheer wealth that was getting generated through slave industries. Has to be said right from the off. It was molasses, rum, tobacco, and of course king cotton. Cotton was the absolute, to the extent you got this huge cotton exchange was just like Wall Street. So without kind of going too deeply into this, all of these things that I started from a kind of nugget of research, which was very simple. That the American Civil War started with a gun that was forged in a Duke Street ironmonger, and the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter in Carolina in 1861. The end of the war, the final surrender of the CSS Shenandoah was on the Mersey, and the American Civil War actually ended formally on the steps of Liverpool Town Hall. So that's two fascinating facts. But in between there, I found an awful lot. So Water Street, for instance, Water Street effectively is set in 1863. It's a kind of spy thriller of the time, but it's pinned together by real events. One of those real events was James Dunwoody Bullock's connection with building the Confederate Navy. Now, what I discovered in this journey, looking at archives, really trawling through, not just reading the books, because you can only learn so much from other people's interpretation, but actually going through archives. I found some absolute nuggets. One of them was that Liverpool at the time was nearly within a hair's breadth bombed by Abraham Lincoln's Navy. So the Americans Lincoln's cabinet got together and seriously considered sending a flotilla up through the Irish Sea, right into the Mersey, to attack Liverpool. Principally the shipyards, because the shipyards were the culprits as far as they saw it. They were in cahoots with the Confederates, and also because they were, pardon the expression, but Lincoln's government and Lincoln himself were very, very annoyed at Lord John Russell in particular, who was deliberately sitting in his hands. They had this thing called the Foreign Enlistment Act, which effectively guaranteed Britain's neutrality. And this was the coach and horses was driven through that effectively by this action. They had jamborees, open massive events. To give you an idea how massive this was, there was a jamboree held for the quote unquote Confederate injured soldiers at St. George's Hall. So they filled St. George's Hall in order for a fundraising effort. Abercromby Square, the support for the Confederacy was massive. Now, I'll put this into context. At the time, at the start of Water Street, where it happens, we're talking about the summer of 1863. You got the run up to Gettysburg, which was the pivotal event in the American Civil War. It was where everything kind of changed, but there was still a very good case for the Confederacy actually winning, and winning to them would have been basically partition in the United States at the time, taking their own independence. Washington's actually quite far south. They were trying to encircle Washington. So while that's going on, the Union's blocking all of this trade, using their navy, which was vastly superior to the Confederacy, blocking all this trade in the eastern seaboard. You think about the panhandle of Florida going all the way up. They were stopping anything coming out, or they were trying to anyway. And as a subtotal of that, people in Liverpool were getting very antsy. They were making vast fortunes very, very quickly. In the late 1850s, there was a huge boom in cotton, and effectively bringing it all in. George's Dock, which is now where the Three Graces are, that was a big dock. That was the most formidable dock in the city at the time in the mid-19th century. They were literally bringing the products in, so the huge bales of cottons off the ship, and the banks were kind of administering all this vast wealth. So all of a sudden, this was threatened. The cotton stops coming out from the south. This could shut us down. This vast wealth, and wherever you got money, power, wealth, you're going to intrinsically connect it with the war. Yeah. So that was something that was going on. And I thought this is absolutely fascinating as a backdrop. Also, there was a Cold War style spy game going on the streets of Liverpool, and in the shipyards and kind of going out to sea. And there are so many stories connected with that. The Union had a very strong presence. They had effectively an embassy, but let's call it a consulate on Paradise Street. And one of Lincoln's favourite allies, really, a guy called Thomas Haynes Dudley, was and he's again another character in my book. He was the consul, the US consul. Now he was offered the ambassadorship to Japan, but he chose Liverpool over it because Liverpool was seen itself as being more important than Japan.
Second city of the empire, wasn't it?
Second city, but like I say, you look into it, there was a sort of arrogance about it, really, and again, that's in the book. There's a sort of a tail wagging the dog thing going on, with because of this wealth, it was sort of Whitehall was getting influenced. You go back to Gladstone, Lord Liverpool, even you go back even further. The corridors of power in London, many of them were merchants that were attached to that mercantile thing that was going on in the city, which again, I can't say that without mentioning, it was connected with slave industries. Yeah. Even though they abolished slavery in theory, and it kind of properly kicked in the 1830s, huge insurance payouts to all the slavers, and they only stopped paying the interest off that a few years ago.
Yeah.
And allied to that, they were it was just a complete mess as far as the money that was made. I mean, we're talking after slavery was abolished, more money was made from the slaveries by 100-fold than before, because you get the invention of the screw propeller. You could have bigger ships, you could have ironclad ships, you could sail these vessels and put more product on them. And of course, we've got the Industrial Revolution in full flow. And so all of these things, one's linked to the other, as the Americans call it, the railroad, the railway system. So you've got all of this, new technology that in at sea and on land that's really making this whole thing, ferment. And in the middle of this, you got this American Civil War, which effectively, as I said before, came within a hair's breadth of becoming the First World War. 50 odd years before the actual First World War happened, because Britain and France were getting petitioned by the Confederates very strongly, and they were trying to lure them into it. The only reason that Britain really didn't want to get involved was because they didn't fancy, they'd just come out the Crimea, and they didn't really fancy having another big swedge, as particularly the American with the Union Army, because they were the most powerful army in the world at the time, even back then. So a lot of these things sort of add up. I can't tell you about it. It's very much linked to the second book, but I'll wait for your question on that. But that whole sort of sphere that was going on for me made for a story. So I've got agents sort of wandering around Camel Laird's, plotting to bring down vessels, and this kind of intelligence network that's happening from Liverpool directly out of it. Let's not forget the Telegraph hadn't quite kicked in at this point, so any news that was going to come into Liverpool and from America and vice versa was going to take 3 weeks. Yeah. So you've got this really kind of interesting sort of lag that's going on, and that kind of, so anyone who was a sort of spy, as it were, almost had to think on their feet and act sort of almost independently and kind of, from the spy masters over yonder.
So, John, but the research, do you go into sort of fine details on the research? Are you spending time down at Liverpool Central Library?
I spend a lot of time down there. I know the archivist really well. She's brilliant, Vicky. I like tactile research. I like to be able to see things. Oh, yeah. Either preferably pick them up or kind of at least see it in front of me. I'm not going to denigrate online research so much, because that's an incredible thing. It can be a jumping off point, but for stuff like this, I like to be able to get something right in front of me. So there's a great map, and sometimes they put it in display in the archive. So anyone listening, go and check this out. It's brilliant. It's called the Ackerman map. Ackerman was a printer of the time in the mid 19th century. This is actually from 1847, so a little bit before. But check it out. It's available online. You can get a high resolution print of it. Yeah. Effectively, it's like a Google Earth for 1847, so you can see how the city looked from a sort of elevation, but not like a plan view like most maps, but from the side. Yeah. And what was going on at the time is balloonists would go up and kind of and illustrate the city. Yeah. That's how they made it work. And there was a few of these knocking around, but the Ackerman map's the most striking because you can see as soon as you get to Bootle, there's nothing. It's just grass. So you can see the limits of the city on this map, and it's really kind of condensed. Kensington, nothing much there. This is, Kensington. There's a lot of Victorian buildings in Kensington, but you can't. This predates them. Yeah. Even going up Scotty, that Scotland Road and all that, you can't see much down there. There's windmills and stuff like that on Scotland Road. Yeah. So this helps me to build a picture. Weirdly enough, at the time, 1847, there were a lot of people coming to the city. 10 years later, 15 years later, at the time of the novel, there were actually as many people in Liverpool as there are now. Yeah. And yet it was only a fraction of the size it is now. So it just gives you an idea of huge numbers. And that's an important thing to mention about Water Street and the Americans of Civil War, and the third book, which I'll hopefully be able to tell you a little bit about. You know, I've married the seismic event of the American Civil War to the Great Irish Hunger, because Liverpool, and probably actually the rest of the UK, Liverpool's probably the most Irish city in the UK, but certainly Manchester, Newcastle, London itself, you know, Birmingham, all had huge Irish influxes at the time, and it was just absolutely profound. So quite a few of my characters are actually Irish. And it does reference it in Water Street. So all of this sort of comes together, and the clue in the Irish thing is, you know, I hit up Trinity University as well. You know, quite a few sort of Ivy League archives as well that I found information from. Wasn't able to physically go over there, which sort of did my head in a little bit, because, as I say, I like being tactile, but I was able to pull down a lot of information from creating a relationship with the archivist and going, you know, okay, go and find me this, and they did. And they come back with something incredible.
All right, just moving on a little bit then. So you're currently working on a spy crime novel called The Ballad of Patton. Is it pronounced Sorcha?
Sorcha, yeah.
Sorcha, right.
Yeah.
That's a prequel, is it, to Water Street? That centers around the huge Irish diaspora of the 1840s. Now, 1.5 million people alone came through Clarence Dock then, didn't he, during the Great Hunger? So tell us something about when this is coming out, and how's you know, and when's it going to be out? Yeah.
Well, I'm actually working on it right now. So there's a publisher called Open the Quad Books who are going to put it out later in the summer. We haven't got a final date for that, but it's working hand in hand, because I've actually been making it as a feature film as well all this time. I don't know how I get time to bloody sleep, to be honest, fellas. But I mean, just haven't got a new dog and everything, but I'm not going to go down there. It's an absolute labour of love. It again sort of connected, goes right back into my sort of DNA almost, family history, and, you know, hearing these stories about the original settlements in Vauxhall, and actually the other side of the city where the Baltic Triangle is now, so Jamaica Street, Sparling Street, you had the early courthousing that sort of sprung up, and this predates the Great Hunger, because you had other, you know, seismic events going on in Ireland that kind of forced people out, you know, centuries before. So Liverpool really only started as a city. Like, Liverpool actually didn't become a city till 1870 off. So it was a town. But it was very much a metropolis in that period that we're talking about, 1847. It was changing almost by the day, really. And I think I wanted to place Liverpool in that sort of bracket. You know, probably not enough actually is being written or filmed about the Great Hunger. I think there's still a lot of trauma attached to it in Ireland, in particular. And I find that, you know, you go over there. I did a research trip down to Cork and Waterford last year, and I went to Skibbereen, and it's a belly punch. It really gets you when you go down there. It's difficult to describe, really. It's still very present, even though it was a long time ago now. It was 170 odd years ago, but it's still very present. But I was feeling this, so I thought, no, I need to do something, and I need to kind of connect these dots, and, you know, finding out that stuff about 1.5 million Irish, which is a vast number of people, really, considering the population.
Yeah.
Well, the population of Ireland at the time, at the beginning of the Great Hunger, was 8 million. It subsequently got brought down to, I think it was like around 3-4 million. You know, so that's more than half your population, and you get, you know, it's either leave or die, basically. That was the choice. So you've got, you know, droves of people going off, and the famous coffin ships that went to America. Well, that itself could be a death sentence, but if you were able to get to America, you got incredible survival, you know, skills. But, you know, many just chose the path of least resistance, or all they could manage, which was to get across the Irish Sea. So a lot's been made of, probably because of American media, of the Irish and American, 50 million Irish Americans and so forth. And that's a substantial story. But what isn't actually spoken about too much is how many people actually came over here. And I wanted to kind of address that. I wanted to kind of really get into that because, it was a damn struggle. It was so hard. As soon as you were off the boat, you had man catchers, as they were called. So effectively, if you were male, they were going to try and press gang you into either Merchant Navy or Royal Navy. If you were a child or a woman, you could get into the cotton mills or any of the manufacturing. You were basically sold off as effectively slave labor. I mean, they call it indentured, but effectively these gangs were organizing this, and they were operating legally. And the sex trade was rabid in the city at the time. And again, it's something that wasn't really documented that much in that way because it's one of those things about Victorian morals, but we know about Victorian morals being completely hypocritical. Incredibly hypocritical. So you had the biggest workhouse in Europe on Brownlow Hill. It was absolutely vast. It was a citadel. So where the Catholic cathedrals now, you have this huge, and all of this sort of fed into Pat and Sawker. And I wanted to tell two perspectives from different parts of Ireland and how, well, I'm not going to ruin the ending, but how this sort of intertwines. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff I found out through the research of that book.
For a new writer from Liverpool, well, doesn't have to be from Liverpool, can be anywhere. So a new writer is coming into writing for the first time and wants to tell stories that are rooted in the city, like you have with Liverpool, if you like. What's one piece of advice that you'd offer to them starting out as a writer?
Don't worry about your writing. Simple as that. Get close to your subject. Get close to it, because a few spelling errors or a bit of kind of loose craft, or you kind of you're telling, not showing, and all this sort of stuff you get told, and it kind of pales into insignificance if you've got something that you've actually got a connection to. And that's the important thing. It's got to be a sort of consuming passion. It has to be something that you'll really drawn along. As you can see with me, I could talk about my books all night because of not just my books.
You can see the passion in there,
and I think it's finding the story. It's kind of like being in love with the idea of being in love, but you don't really know what that is. It's the same thing. It's it's kind of like, oh, I want to write a book, or I want to make a film, and I don't know what, but I want to make it. Well, you got to find the what. Go and find the what. Go and really look for it, and it's kind of, there's a lot of kind of BS about contemplating the muse and stuff like that, or but for me, you don't have anything unless you actually have a connection with that subject, because if you've got a connection, then you'll want to find out as much as you possibly can about it.
That mirrors what people
leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, that mirrors what people say to us, really. You've got to know your subject, you've got to have a passion about it and have that connection, and then it doesn't matter what it looks like as you write it, because you can always worry about that later.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, as I mentioned, the time's against us. We're going to have to say thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, find out a lot more. Yeah.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it, gents. Thank you.
Brilliant.
God, it's so interesting. It's untrue. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but for now, though, John, cheers, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All
John.
the best.
We'll speak again.
Thank you.
Some point
Speak
next
soon.
week. Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.